There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chip Moore. Los Angeles and Orange County Audio Society is meeting today at the Source in Torrance. Our guest host is Jason Lord, brother Stephen, and we're going to have a great program for you today. To do the introductions, let me put on our president, Mike Wexberg.
I disappeared. Can you hear me?
No, we just lost your video. Can you restart it?
There we go.
Hi, Mike. We're glad you're here.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Mike Wexberg. I'm president of the Los Angeles and Orange County Audio Society. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our August Zoom meeting. We've been having these Zoom meetings quite frequently during the pandemic, and most people have a lot of fun with them. And today we have, I think, a really great program for you all to enjoy. I want to welcome everyone. Most of the time we have society members on these Zoom meetings. Our host, Jason Lord, and Stephen have been advertising this meeting separately, so there may be some folks who aren't familiar with the society. And if that's true, then I just encourage you to go to our website, take a look, and consider joining the Los Angeles and Orange County Audio Society. I'm going to throw things over to our host here pretty quickly, but just a few announcements first. A protocol thing. While you're in the meeting, we would appreciate if you would mute your audio to avoid extraneous noises. And you can also mute your video if you like, and that helps out with bandwidth issues sometimes. During the meeting, we will have a question and answer session. If you think of any questions while the presentations are being conducted, we'd like you to submit those to Chip Moore using the chat function of Zoom. It's usually down on the bottom of the screen. You hit that chat line will open up, and the default is to chat with everyone who's on the call. We would like you not to do that, just so we can manage the questions better. We'd like you to search down and find Chip Moore's name and select it and just send your question to Chip. And at the appropriate time, he'll decide on the order and eliminate duplicates or whatever's required. We usually at the end of the meeting will throw things open for a back and forth question and answer opportunity if the attendees would like to do that. And then you can unmute your audio then. But for the bulk of the meeting, we request that you keep your audio muted. So those are the mechanics of the meeting. A couple of quick announcements. Our next Zoom meeting for the Society is going to be on September the 12th. And our speaker is Dr. David Robinson, who is one of the winners of our Founders Award, one of the early pioneers of the Society. And he's also the editor-in-chief of Positive Feedback online magazine. Very interesting speaker. So we hope you'll enjoy that on September the 12th. And then at the end of September, the 25th and the 26th is going to be our first physical meeting in more than a year and a half. The Society is a co-sponsor of Can Jam SoCal. And that's going to be held in September at the Irvine Marriott. And we encourage everyone to go to their website, buy a ticket, attend that meeting. We're expecting good attendance, assuming the virus is not going to damp things down too much. It'll be exciting to see everyone again. And we would like you all to come out for Can Jam. It's always a lot of fun. And then the big announcement that I couldn't make at the last Zoom meeting, we hope you've all heard by now, that the Society is sponsoring AudioCon LA, the biggest, greatest audio show that the country's going to see this
That's
year.
something very good.
And
But I didn't.
it's going to be January the 12th through the 14th at the Hyatt Newport
Thanks for the
Beach.
stand.
It should be a very exciting show. The exhibitor rooms are moving really well. I'm pretty sure that the Source AV is going to be there.
There's a
And
rumor.
that's going to be a really exciting activity. We expect several thousand people to come. And the Hyatt Newport Beach is a beautiful resort hotel, very classic place. Been there for a long time, and it hosts during the summer the Newport Beach Jazz Festival. Not the Newport, Rhode Island Jazz Festival, but the Newport Beach Jazz Festival. And they have several concerts that are on the schedule. You can go to the Hyatt website and see what they are and get a little preview of AudioCon LA. So the Society is really excited about that. And you'll hear a lot more about it as we get closer to that time. So let me not delay any further. And today we're going to be at the Source AV in Torrance, California. When we have physical meetings there, they're always among the best meetings because that's one of the biggest and best audio places in the LA area. And there's a lot to see there, a lot of good music to hear, great equipment, very knowledgeable people. And the leader of the pack there is Jason Lord. So I'd like to turn it over now to Jason.
So hope everybody's doing well and having at least a good start of a good weekend. Today we're gonna let a really close associate of ours, Will Kline, come on, and Will's the brand ambassador for the brand Sonus Faber.
Look, come here.
Which is currently experiencing probably
You hear that?
so some people have to learn how to use that mute button. But anyway, Will is the brand ambassador for Sonus Faber, and Sonus Faber is experiencing one of the greatest brand revivals I've ever seen there just recently in the last, well, since COVID actually. We've seen the sales for Sonus Faber just get very, very exciting. A lot of people are very interested in the brand, more so than before. And so we're very pleased with that. As a retailer, it makes it so that the product moves a little quicker, but we're just now recognizing that the people are accepting the newer models and they're doing it in a much more positive way than before. So we're kind of looking forward. So I'm going to turn this over now to Will because I'm boring and Will's not.
Hello, hello.
Who's going to switch that over?
Bill, are you there?
There we go. Can you see me?
There you are.
We good?
There you go.
All right, excellent. So thanks for having me, gentlemen. Certainly big fans of the Audiophile Society, the movement you guys are making, and a huge fan of Jason Lord. You know, Sonus Faber has always been a brand that depends highly on the gentle art of demonstration in order to really understand what our products do and what they're capable of. So we are very, very careful about who we allow to sell our product throughout the United States. And really, we want the very, very best in each and every territory. So at the Source AV, most of you folks have been there, amazing selection of gear. And one can walk in there and essentially have all of the different ingredients directly in front of them for the chefs at that store to come and create the perfect recipe for their listening situation, be it, you know, constraints in terms of finance, constraints in terms of the room and the environment or pre-existing equipment you got. Every single system needs to be tailor-made to a particular customer. And we rely heavily on stores like Jason's to be able to do that for us. So certainly appreciate that. Thanks for having me. So I'd like to start with a message from our global brand ambassador, Mr. Paolo Tezzon. Now, Paolo came aboard the company several years ago and actually had a chance to work directly with the company's founder, Mr. Franco Serblin. And as his right-hand man, he was responsible for many of the engineering projects that Sonus Faber has completed over the years. And of course, when Franco left the company, Paolo took over as head R&D director. So he is responsible for much of the kind of changes we've seen in the sound of Sonus Faber over the last 10 or 12 years. And certainly all of the new products and the entire Sonus Faber lineup has, you know, some of Paolo's engineering prowess incorporated. And Sonus Faber is a brand that, you know, has always been known as creating a natural sound, having long-term listenability. And it's a brand that, you know, from the get-go has been really focused on research and development more than anything else. And while it's easy to get lost in the romance of our beautiful cabinets and the fine Italian wood crafting that comprises them, it's really the technology behind them that first made me passionate about the brand. And I'd like to share a little bit of some of the unique philosophies and technologies that Sonus Faber uses. But first, I'm going to go to Paolo. He's prepared a great little video for us that's going to get into a little bit of the Sonus Faber philosophy and engineering, and even we'll get to see a little bit of the new Sonus Faber facility in Vicenza.
Worry about all these guys are interested. Yeah, I thought you said it was in person.
Right.
No, I didn't. What?
This is Paolo Tezzon, and I am the Sonus Faber brand ambassador.
You guys
I
able to hear
would
that?
like to send from Italy a big hello to Jason Lord and to all the Source friends. With this little clip, we are about to discover the process which is leading us in creating our products. Enjoy it.
So, here we are. Let's start discussing the development process of Sonus Faber, and in the wild time, thanks to this occasion, we will have also the chance to have a tiny bit of a factory tour inside of the company. And I'd like to underline that this is a preview because almost nobody already seen the huge renewal work that we did inside our company during the COVID lockdown. So here we go. Obviously, the first step when it comes to creating a Sonus Faber product is about the design process. And the design process is based basically in its early stages on the mood boards. And this is basically a good example of what we're talking about when we discuss mood boards. Basically, it's about collecting several pictures which are somehow related to the concept you are about to design. Because perhaps a certain detail, a certain design language is what you're looking for. So you put all those pictures together and you sort of grab inspiration, which allows you to create some early sketches. So basically, thanks to the mood board, you are creating the mood of the object. And starting from this point, you start also with the design sketches, because you have a mood inside of you and you start to design by hand what the product is going to be like. This is one of the latest things we did, as you can clearly understand. And talking about the design process, we have the chance to take a look at the design lab. The design lab is a facility which is staying on the other side of the street in front of the main building, which has been recently redesigned, mainly redone, and it is hosting whatever it is related to the creative process, which leads from the first idea to the final product. Particularly here you can see the table of the marketing department, and you can see a guy who's talking right now at one edge. You can see how much lucky I am right now because I'm surrounded by beautiful girls. But also there is the mechanical engineering department that you can see right here, the design department as well, and another perspective, including the technical department. So all those people which are technically working, design-wise working, marketing-wise working around the product are gathered together in this building, separated from the main facilities, a little bit protected, and creating the best possible environment for creativity. Of course, another important stage when it comes to the product development is from the sketch to the engineering. And this part in itself takes a lot of micro steps to reach the engineering stage. Of course, from the initial sketches, a design 3D model has been created. And from that design 3D model, the mechanical engineering started to design every single part related to development of the specific item we are about to develop. So basically, there is a design 3D created by the design department, and then the mechanical engineering take this 3D and they use it to create the real parts 3D. And every single detail is then created from this sort of digital sculpture which is moving on. But at the same time, there's another important process going on, which is the simulation stage. Here you can see our colleague Florian, which is evaluating all the vibrational modes that can happen in the 3D drawings. We are still in a 3D drawing stage, and thanks to this job we can evaluate the mechanical vibrational behavior of the enclosure. And so we can, right from the start, create some corrections for in case of certain unwanted results. For instance, add some bracing inside of the cabinet. This is what typically happens. Or maybe changes the kind of glue, searching for a different compliance. Of course, this is allowing you to create a 3D drawings which will be surely work perfectly. And after this creation of the drawings relative to all the parts which have been already performance optimized right from the start, we have of course the acoustic development, which is based on the same process. Basically, there's a lot to simulate right from the start. Particularly if you are creating a new loudspeaker system, it might happen that you need to design transducers, speakers from scratch, or you have to modify existing speakers to a different need. And here the acoustic simulation comes to play another important play. Once we reach the early prototypes of the transducer development, which we put in place for that specific loudspeaker system concept, and once also the mechanical engineering reached such a stage that they were able to prototype some mechanical parts, the early samples which are resulting from those two different paths are merged together, and we start to tune them, to make them work, to double check with measurement. And we do that both in an open field, like we always did in the Sonus Faber tradition. This is very important because it is a characteristic of the Sonus Faber design approach. We take a lot of measurements in real environments right from the start. Not only, of course, in an amazing anechoic chamber, which is capable to tell us exactly what the speakers are doing inside of the cabinet prototype, but also we take, I was saying, a lot of measurements in a real environment right from the start. All these measurements allowing us to adjust perfectly the tuning of the transducers inside of the cabinet, to achieve the crossover design, or at least the first stages of the crossover designs. And then I'm very happy to show you, this is our reference brand new listening room, which is the listening room of the lab. We have another important stage, which is the final tuning. Because what we do once everything has been done from the scientific point of view, we start to add the human touch. This is what we do in Sonus Faber, and basically we start listening to the speakers. And this is the moment where we start to do several changes, only done by ear. Of course, we go back double checking by ear. But this is very important because we start to search without any instruments the most natural sound according to our experience, according to our tradition. Let me spend a couple of words also on this amazing listening environment we just finished to optimize during the past month. You can tell it's very big, it's very huge, it's capable of an amazing performance, it's capable to also extract the maximum even from our bigger designs such as the AIDA. It is provided with an amazing 9.6.4 cinema system, custom integrated. And right here, of course, we take then notes of all the changes we do by ear, and we go back double checking by instruments in order to make sure, because sometimes happens, sometimes your perception, even if you're really skilled, leads you to make some mistakes when it comes to speaker design. Could be acoustic, could be electric. So we have the tendency, if something measured not perfectly right but sounds way better and it's not creating counter effects, of course, we would have it go this way. But it is also important to double check, because sometimes even if you're extremely skilled, I was saying, doing things by ear can be a little bit tricky and can mislead you in a way. So it's always good to double check. Here you have another perspective of the same listening room I was discussing before. When it comes to the final tuning, it is also beautiful to show you the other extreme quality listening room, which is in the main building. Now we virtually crossed the road and we started to look at the main building, which is the one everybody knows, the one with the wooden wings. This is another reference listening room we just created. This room is dedicated to training and is dedicated to host. So as soon as possible, it would be amazing if you could come and visit us. Let's hope that moment is close. It is a 7.4.4 multi-channel system, is a stereo system as well. It is slightly smaller and allows you also to experience very small speakers, because the lab listening room is pretty big, and so when you have to listen to small speakers, it might be a little bit too big. So it's good to have a different dimension, a double check reference listening room. Here you have another perspective. And this is the production department. And this is extremely important, because at the end of the day, once we reach the final result, once we are completely sure of the result, the last part of the development process is to properly transfer the last prototype into a producible object. And this is where the magic happens. This is where our extremely skilled artisan create and build by hand every day the Sonus Faber speakers everybody knows, something we are proud about. This is the main production. Here you can see also the final test, because each speaker is of course individually tested before being packaged and stored in the warehouse. Another perspective of our production. And in this facility we basically build everything from the Lumina 1 up to the Amati tradition. And finally, another beautiful building which I would like to show you, which is the production boutique. The reference speakers are hand-built by the guys in a completely different facility. This is where speakers like Il Cremonese, Lilium, Aida and the Sonus Faber are hand-built by our most skilled artisans. I mean, the whole Sonus Faber production is an artisan production, but this is where craftsmanship becomes a form of art, literally, because the mounting process is so individual, let me say, so unique for each piece, that literally this is a form of art and something that perfectly expresses the value represented by our brand.
Thank you very much for staying with us, and thank you very much for your kind attention. And while saying you goodbye, I really wishing that we can all soon gather together and meet in person. Bye bye from Italy. Ciao.
So there you see the Sonus Faber production and design facility. And that's a facility that we have done several new updates to over the past few months. In fact, at Sonus Faber, we've got a lot of improvements that we're making to our facilities. We've essentially doubled production. We've hired a bunch of new people. We even have some new young blood in our engineering and our development teams. So lots of changes happening at Sonus Faber. So I'd like to open it up if you guys had any questions.
One came in just now. Can you answer this one? What is the order of the crossovers that you're using?
So the Sonus Faber crossover actually uses a complex slope, whereas most crossovers would essentially use, let's say, a 6 dB per octave slope all the way across the frequency band. We actually find that by finding the optimal frequency range of each of our drivers and adjusting the crossover such that we're allotting slightly more information across certain frequencies to one driver versus the other, so let's say to the tweeter versus the mid-range in a top crossover situation. And by using complex curves, we can actually steer the energy to the driver that is most capable of propagating the ideal frequencies. So we don't use a kind of flat slope crossover. Our crossovers are such that, the first part of the slope may be at 6 dB per octave, and then we may increase the amplitude of that slope such that it's 8 or 12 dB per octave. And then the final part of the slope may settle back out to 6 dB per octave, right? So we actually use complex slopes. And essentially, this is something that we do with computer-aided design, but more by ear. This is something that we found gives us better clarity, better integration of our drivers, and just a better sense that we're not listening to drivers at all, that we're listening to a complete musical presentation. So excellent question. I wish I could answer it a little bit more in depth, but essentially we're using complex crossover curves.
I think the question was, it was more if you're using a third order network type of question.
Mark, you want to jump in and ask it directly? I think the answer is no. Next question. Can the speaker survive a car that drives over it?
There is a few of our designs that I would put up to that challenge. I'd say the Lilium, possibly, most definitely the Aida. That thing is rock solid, and depending on the weight of the car, of course. But yeah, when we're talking about the rigidity and strength that you need to be able to support larger drivers, especially the 12-inch downfiring woofer that's in something like the Aida, you do need a pretty structurally rigid cabinet. So yeah, I'd probably put that up against the test.
I noticed that some of your speakers are leather wrapped. What does that do for the sound?
Yeah, so you'll see in a lot of the Sonus Faber models, we will use multiple combinations of material to arrive at the final product. And many times this is done to essentially offset any of the, the unnatural traits or the problems that we have with resonant frequencies in certain materials. So in all of the models that we have that are leather wrapped, and actually we use leather on quite a few of our models at this point, essentially we're doing that. Essentially, we're doing that to tame any of the resonant frequency that might be in that wood material. So when we're using an MDF or we're using a multi-layered wood design, having that little bit of leather on top will actually help to tame some of that spurious vibration.
Great. For those who are just joining us, would you please turn off your sound, hit the mute button on your screen? Thank you very much. Another question, maybe you could discuss the various model lines since you have several.
We do. In Sonus Faber at this point, we basically cover the price ranges of about $900 a pair for our entry-level bookshelf, all the way up to $130,000 a pair or $250,000 a pair at our maximum flagship. The great thing about Sonus Faber is we've got lots of different models that fill the categories in between. And much of the technology that you'll find, much of the proprietary technology that you'll find at the very top of our line will actually trickle down and find itself into our most affordable models. So the Lumina, for instance, which is where we get started with the Sonus Faber lineup. Let's see if I can pull up a picture here for you. This family consists of 2 floor standers now and 2 bookshelves. We just added a couple of new models to the line, but this is essentially where our freestanding speakers start. And the bookshelf speaker that you're seeing there is called the Lumina 1. That's about $900 per pair. So with that, we need to make sure, obviously, that they sound like Sonus Faber, that they take advantage of all of the different technology that we can implement in them, and that they hold their weight at their particular price point. And, just judging by some of the reviews that we've gotten on this speaker, I would say they absolutely fit the bill. Now with the Lumina, as with every other speaker in our lineup, we have a couple of proprietary technologies. The first of which is something that is easily recognizable, and that would be the damped apex dome tweeter. So with the DAD design, and again, this is a technology that we have on all of our freestanding models now, even our in-wall and in-ceiling speakers contain this technology. But with the DAD design is essentially designed to handle and mitigate some of the problems that we have when we're dealing with the soft dome tweeter. So I'll show you a little profile of this. This is the DAD. So what you're seeing is a standard silk dome tweeter. We do actually apply doping to our silk, and that's a special recipe of our own design. But the interesting thing that you're seeing here is there's essentially a structure that goes over top of the tweeter. And upon that structure is a little bit of a dampening material that's actually making contact with the very apex of the dome of that silk soft dome. And what we're doing here is essentially completely destroying any of the anti-phase waves that would be coming from the face of the tweeter. Essentially, because the motor of a tweeter design is along the circumference of the diaphragm, unlike other drivers where you essentially have the motor design at the center of the diaphragm, there's a strange anomaly that happens when those waveforms that are created around the circumference of that diaphragm coalesce into the center of the dome. So the apex of the dome, the very tip of the dome, is the place that's actually going to broadcast the most noise. Because if you can imagine in slow motion, as those waveforms coalesce toward the center of that diaphragm, they're going to run into each other. You're going to have waveform interaction. So it's going to cause cancellation. It's going to cause a doubling up at certain frequencies. And invariably, it's going to cause timing anomalies that will interfere with the other frequencies that the tweeter's trying to propagate, right? Add to that the fact that human beings are incredibly sensitive to timing anomalies, and that the information coming from the tip of the dome is invariably going to reach you slightly faster than the rest of the information coming from the circumference of the dome, right? So this problem is something that every manufacturer that deals with a soft dome tweeter has to address. There's different ways of addressing it. We have not found a better solution than our damped apex dome tweeter. We believe it's the best soft dome tweeter in the world. And again, the way that we achieve this is by applying direct dampening to the tip of that dome. So we knew this was going to cancel out the anti-phase information and give us a flatter frequency response, and it absolutely achieves that. We knew that it would give us better propagation because we don't get much of the comb filtering that we get from that anti-phase information interacting with the waveforms as they're propagated from the diaphragm. What we did not realize is how much it would benefit the frequency extension. So of all the soft domes out there, we believe this has the greatest flat frequency extension. So it's easier to drive. It makes it so that it's easier to place because we get that nice wide dispersion. It's more linear across the frequency band. So you don't have to worry about it having a particular characteristic, having particular coloration. And we can actually drive it harder because we don't have to worry about that anti-phase information interfering with the output, the overall output of the tweeter relative to the other drivers. So it's kind of a simple solution. All happens in the physical analog domain, but I don't know of a better way of making a tweeter.
I have one interesting technical that sort of fits in here. How does the anechoic chamber performance compare to the normal room performance?
This is something that is
incredibly
important. Sure. Yeah, because there really is no normal, right? Every single situation, every single circumstance that a person is going to be listening to music in is going to be completely outside of the loop of the recording engineer to the recording, right? This is not a closed system. So this means that the cables that you're using, the quality of power in your home, obviously the shape and dimension of the room they're using, the different materials that are going to be in that room, right onto the source component, the recording quality itself, the interconnects you're using, the isolation that you have, the amplifier, the preamplifier, all of these are going to add to or take something away from that signal that we're trying to maintain. So when we think about the construction of a loudspeaker, the ideal being to recreate the feeling of presence at a live musical event at whatever the recording, wherever the recording took place. We really have to think about the fact that these speakers are going to be played in people's homes. Most folks are not going to break out the anechoic chamber so they can listen to their favorite cut, right? So we have to keep in mind that we're going to have boundaries, in most cases, at least 6 of them. We're going to be nearer to certain boundaries than others. Our bass performance is going to be directly relative to the distance to our nearest wall. And there's going to be certain places in a given room where we're going to get ideal bass response versus turbulent bass response, right? And as we move up, through the frequency bands, obviously going up into the mid-range and high frequency, then the room itself kind of changes, right?
Yeah.
The elements and the volumes and the shapes that will affect lower frequencies are not necessarily the same as the surfaces and the dimensions and the thicknesses that are going to affect the other frequencies. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. So when we design our speakers,
Wife's in
one of the things
rehab
that we
and they
do
won't be doing
is
it.
we do our very best to listen to each and every project in multiple different rooms and spaces. So there you saw on Paolo's video, those are two of the different sound rooms that we use. Obviously, we've got the anechoic chamber there for doing initial measurements.
Trying to get on.
Try to make sure that each and every one of our speakers performs well in as many different environments as possible. Right?
It's his full screen.
So,
Excuse me, let's stop right there and see if I can find the person who's speaking.
All right, man.
I think it's Eddie Marin.
All right, man. Thanks for
got you,
calling.
Eddie.
All right.
Yeah, I've communicated there. Eddie, if you can mute, please do so right now. I'll chat with him
Right.
again.
But just to finish my thought,
Go ahead.
one of the things that is most important when we're talking about how a speaker will perform in a room versus how it performs in the anechoic chamber is your tweeter design,
Oh,
right? Having a tweeter design that has a very directed, very focused conical shape, it does allow certain advantages in terms of being able to place the speaker in a given perfect
where'd you
room.
get Kline?
But we have found through many
I'm a
different listening
retired
tests
detective.
and
Don't
many
call me
different
again. Thank you.
environments that having a wider array that has a more flat frequency response across the entirety of that array gives us more options, more capabilities to play well in lots of different spaces, and a better sense of where to set the speakers and where you can listen to them to be able to enjoy a real stereo sound field. So it's something we think about in every single aspect of speaker design. We do not design our speakers for anechoic chambers. We do not design them for computers. We do not design them for robots, right? Our ultimate form of accuracy is how a human being will react, the physiological response to listening to music through our speakers. So when we try to recreate the reality of the recording event, it's not just enough to recreate the frequencies as perfectly as they can be. We have to recreate the entire experience, and that absolutely is going to involve the space in which you're listening.
We
Great
have
question.
a member who actually builds and plays violin and asks the question, when are you going to go back to Cremona Builder name?
So if we're talking about just the naming of our different projects,
It could well be.
obviously we've got lots of calls to the famous violin makers. If you look at our homage series, we've got a model called the Serafino. We've got a model called the Guarneri. We've got a model called the Amati. As you go up the line, we've got, of course, the Il Cremonese, which is probably the most famous of the Stradivari violins. So we always keep some models in our lineup, namesake to the famous violin makers. But as we move forward, we're always trying to incorporate the feeling of what we're trying to do, along with the ideal customer for this particular project, and obviously that kind of call to our rich Italian heritage. So there's always a great workshop when we're figuring out the names of the different families of products that we do. There always seems to be a point at the end where the Americans are just a little bit upset that it's not something a bit more pronounceable, but you will continue to see the great violin makers represented in our products moving forward.
I think this is a little more technical. Which simulation software is used in the electrical, mechanical, acoustical simulations that you do?
I'm having trouble with the name of the primary one that we use, but we actually use 3 different pieces of software, again, to verify the results of each. And it's funny how some of them, although they're measuring the same thing, will give us slightly different results. So again, it's one of the places where we like to use as many different things as possible. And we're not married to anything. At Sonus Faber, if we find there's a better way to do something, there's a better piece of software, there's a better piece of technology, there's a better machine, there's a better piece of equipment, there's a better microphone, we're always going to experiment with the very best that's out there. So yeah, while I'm not 100% familiar with the software that we use for that, we've been through lots of different software suites to achieve that, and arrived at what we found to be the best.
Talk a little bit about the development roadmap. What are the next speakers that you're going to introduce? They're in design now, I assume?
Absolutely. So we tend to keep our designs about 2 years out. When we're dealing with larger, reference series and flagships, it might be a few more years than that. Can't really talk about exactly what we're going to be coming out with towards the end of this year and the early next year. But we've got two main missions at Sonus Faber, besides the the relative general philosophies that we believe in that kind of catapults us into every project. When we look at our brand right now, we see an opportunity to approach more customers, to approach a wider audience. So expect products from us, much like our Palladio series of in-wall and in-ceiling speakers, or Illumina series here of kind of our less expensive designs. Being able to reach a wider audience and get products in front of more people. So expect to see, a little bit more products being released toward that end. But at the same time, we've got to establish ourselves as one of the pinnacles in terms of manufacturing the best audio products on planet Earth. So we've always got to pay close attention to our very top end of our range as well. So as we look at our current reference level products, our current super speakers, we've developed many technologies over even the past few years, many times in developing our lesser expensive models that we find are going to be amazing when applied to our reference level models. So as we develop new technologies, as we find better ways of doing things, as we improve our manufacturing processes, our machining, our capabilities, we're basically going to continue to expand our line in both directions and continue to improve the models that have been so important to us, namely in the Sonetto range, the Olympica Nova range, and especially in the Homage range. These are speakers that we're known for throughout the world. So we've got to make sure that A, they are outperforming everything else that's out there at the price point, B, that they're truly representing the ideals and philosophies of Sonus Faber, and C, that we are constantly improving on all of those methods and all of those technologies to make better products year after year.
That fits in with a question that I had. How does being owned by the Fine Sounds Corporation affect the sound?
That is a great question. Inside baseball now, folks. So yeah, it's very interesting when we see these acquisitions. Obviously, there's always a plan in place. And many times that plan is to be able to take these different companies and be able to share their resources. And just to catch anybody up who's not aware, we are owned by something called, which was called, although we do still own the intellectual property to the Fine Sounds Group. We call ourselves the Macintosh Group and use the namesake of our largest component. But being part of the Macintosh Group, we actually have, certain parts of each of the company that they would otherwise be responsible for individually, that's handled by the headquarters. So there's certain things we don't have to worry about, certain employees that we don't need at every single facility, which is a hugely advantageous thing from a financial standpoint. But it also allows us to build and share together. And I can't tell you how many Macintosh projects are influenced by my design team at Sonus Faber, how much of the technology, especially when you're looking at our powered products and our in-wall and in-ceiling products that Macintosh does have, some great experience in manufacturing, how much of that information, how many things we were shown where we didn't have to learn by trial and error, so to speak. We could actually take on some of the engineering prowess of our partners, and really being able to think about each of the brand individually and making sure that we're maintaining what's important individual to each brand, but being able to share resources when we can, right? If we want to make an order for a particular type of capacitor that's, to a certain specification, and we find that our friends at Macintosh also need that same type of cap at that spec, we can share those orders. We can basically utilize resources in the best possible way to make sure that we're not, doing extraneous things over the top that don't make sense from a financial standpoint. So that's been hugely advantageous. For Sonus Faber, just having the namesake of a very recognizable brand like Macintosh, kind of in our same fleet, has been very advantageous for us worldwide. It's helped us to build a little bit more recognition within the hi-fi realm. And it also gives us the resources to try things that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to do as a singular company. One of the things that I'm most proud of is our marketing team. Our marketing team basically works for all of the different brands that are part of our group now. And, being able to maintain those relationships, being able to do the outreach, and being able to structure the messaging of all of these companies in a way that makes sense, both individually and as a whole, is something that, you really don't get the advantage of doing in many of these, smaller hi-fi companies. So how does it affect the sound? I would say over the last 5 years, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at, the models that have come out lately, the reviews we're getting on that model, the dealer sentiment for those models, and certainly the sales and the enthusiasm that we're seeing from our customers, I would say that our sound quality has not only not faltered, but it's been nothing but improving over the time since we've been acquired by the group. Now, I can't say that about every single product. There were certainly a couple of missteps along the way. But speaking of our current product lineup, I could not be more proud of the products that we've been able to make. And much of that is a benefit, as a result of the benefit of being part of this greater group. One of the other things it does is when we're thinking about products that we're going to release and what that release schedule is going to be like, because essentially we all have a sort of shared purse, we don't have to think about constantly coming out with new products according to a timeline based on our yearly revenue. Right? We can think about what is the best time to place this product into the market and how is the market going to benefit from this product being created, right? So we can think in 5-year terms, 7-year terms, 10-year terms, rather than, okay, how are we going to make payroll next quarter, right? So that's been hugely advantageous because it gives our designers and our engineers a chance to relax and really do the projects that they're passionate about. Right? The timeline can be stretched out or condensed as much as we need. We have much more, leeway in that respect than we did when we were a smaller company. So that's actually a huge advantage, and that's an advantage that all of the different companies that are part of this group share. So all in all, it's been good. It has not been without its trials and tribulations. But overall, and I can't say this about many of the acquisitions that's happened, especially in this industry, but overall, this has been a good one.
Let's jump back to speakers themselves. How much does the speaker sensitivity weigh into your speaker designs and why?
Sensitivity is interesting. So sensitivity really harkens back to a misunderstanding, I think, that a lot of folks have about engineering, right? And while the goal of every engineer should be to arrive at a perfect solution to a given problem, there is no perfect solution to any given problem, right? When we're dealing with materials in the physical domain, we're already tied, right? We're already at a disadvantage. The ideal tweeter, for instance, would have a 0 mass. We know there is no material that can maintain rigid structural integrity in open air that has a 0 mass. And as many manufacturers have experimented with plasma tweeters, I've never heard one to be incredibly compelling, and it's certainly not cost effective, right? So every single choice that we make, every single design aspect to a given project, certainly within a speaker, within the confines of what we're doing in speakers, there are engineering choices that need to be made, right? A mid-range driver, for instance, should have a maximum rigidity. It should have a rigidity of 100%. It should never fluctuate under any pressure or stress whatsoever. But that would also tie to a very high mass. And one of the other things that we need is extremely low mass on that driver, right? So we've got these choices do we make. Do we maintain the structural integrity regardless of mass, or do we maintain the low mass regardless of structural integrity? Well, the answer is neither of those are correct. So you've got to choose the right, wrong answer somewhere in between, right? And these are the choices that every engineer has to make. And what becomes more important than the solutions that you're coming up with is the sacrifices that you are and are not willing to make through that design process, right? So when we talk about the different aspects, whatever they may be, we always have to keep in mind, and this is something that we actively do at the start of every day, what are our focus? What are our main goals for this project, right? So we want to have something that recreates music in a way that is compelling and believable, right? But at the same time, we want to have a product that you can place in your home. So those two already are diametrically opposed, right? So we've got to make choices somewhere in between. What is the right answer? When we talk about our cabinet design, well, there's one choice, there's one school of thought that says each of the drivers should be individually isolated relative to each other in a given cabinet design. And there's another school of thought that says, well, each of those drivers should be grounded to each other and completely solid in their attachment to each other in a given design. Well, again, both of those answers are wrong. On one solution, you could have a rubber cabinet that achieves that goal. And we know that rubber cabinets, they don't have a sense of life. They sound very dead. You can hear each of the drivers individually. It doesn't sound like a musical presentation. And on the other side of this would be, I don't know, a complete titanium speaker. And we know that's going to sound like garbage. Okay? That's going to ring, and there's going to be all sorts of hardness to it and harshness to it. The right answer is the wrong answer somewhere in between. So we believe strongly in wood and many other natural materials when we're getting into these, the construction, both of the different elements in our speakers and the speaker cabinets themselves. And one of the great features of wood is it has a relatively high strength to mass ratio, right? It is one of nature's best composite materials in that respect. It has a self-dampening nature, which is to say it doesn't make a lot of noise onto itself when you activate it with vibration. That's very important to us. And the overall characteristics of wood are such that they give us this perfect balance between isolating the drivers completely and having a very strong foundation for them to work off of, and allowing just the tiniest bit of oscillation of information in between the drivers, right? Again, if we go completely one direction or completely the other direction, we know both of those are wrong. So we choose the answer that's somewhere in between, that leans more towards long-term listenability and a natural, pure sound, right? So that's why we use many of the elements that are in our cabinets. And forgive me, I forget what the original question was. I'm off on a tangent.
That was great, but I have another one that fits right here. How do you damp down internal resonances? Do you take the cabinet vibration into account, or do you just try to minimize its vibrations?
So we do both.
Yeah.
So when we're
Fits right here.
constructing the cabinet, and this is, in my opinion, there's a right way and wrong way to do this particular aspect of it. We've got to make sure that we're minimizing vibration in the cabinet modes, right? We don't want one particular frequency that's going to resonate the entire cabinet. So we use structural bracing. We use the shape of the wood, the thickness of the wood, and the different wood materials that we use. And as you climb up the line in our product assortment, you will see that we use very complex curvature and different wood finishing techniques to arrive at the final solution. So what we're looking at here, hopefully you can still see the screen. Yep. What we're looking at here is the Olympica Nova, right? And that's the Olympica Nova 5. It's actually the speaker that I own. And on the right-hand side there, you see essentially what is the raw materials that will eventually become the panels that make up the speaker. So what you're seeing there is, I forget what the thickness is, but very thinly cut plies of walnut wood that are then cross-grained. The outer, in this case, wenge, real wood veneer is added, right? And then each of these is epoxy, so essentially glued, shaped, cured, all at the same time. So we've got these gigantic machines that will press these into shape as the glue that dries there, as the glue that adheres them dries. So what this does is allows us to completely control the moisture internally. It cures the wood, so we don't ever have to worry about the wood changing shape over time according to temperature or humidity, and it keeps a nice rigid structural material. So comparing this to a solid wood design or even an MDF design, we get a much more balanced overall tonal quality to the wood, which is they don't ring at one particular resonant frequency nearly as much as either of those other types of wood would. We get more structural rigidity because of this process that we're using, and it becomes more consistent. All right, so this is the wood that we use from the Olympica Nova all the way up through the rest of our line. Of course, as you approach the reference series, well, then instead of using 12 layers, we start using 16 layers, 30 layers, or what have you, depending on the thickness of the cabinet. But invariably, we're using combinations of materials, we're using the shapes of materials, and we're using the processes that we use to cure these materials to give us the best possible materials to use, the best possible tools to use toward the end of balancing the resonant frequency that's going to be in a box, right? So internally, as far as dampening, we do use dampening material in certain of our models. We've actually got proprietary dampening that we use in the Maxima Amateur, for instance, which is basically a mineral injected fiber in that design. But most of the resonance control that we do will actually be figured out by the computers before we even start to the design, right? So we enter in the curvature, we adjust that curvature, we look at the bracing, we adjust the bracing, and of course the complement of drivers, where exactly in the cabinet those are located. All of those are tools that we use to address the resonance in the cabinet. And again, while we don't want to completely 100% deaden our cabinets, we do want a little bit of life in our cabinet. It's important for that resonance to be controlled across the frequency band and for it to be reduced to such a point that it doesn't interfere with the action of the drivers. All right, so I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Do you have any plans for, or do you have powered speakers yet? Talking about electronics with speakers at the same time.
So, believe it or not, Sonus Faber in days past has actually manufactured some electronics, actually a couple of tube amplifiers, and solid state amplifiers, integrated amplifiers. So we're not unfamiliar to the idea of amplification, but we will admit it's not something that's exactly in our wheelhouse, right? And anytime you talk about a speaker company designing an amplifier, it's a completely different bag of worms there. But of course, having our partnership with Macintosh, we've definitely got some guidance there. And just with the amplifier technology, and especially in Class D amplification technology, and the way that that has progressed over the last 15 years, certainly the last 5 years, it's definitely something that we've been looking at. And we're actually finding now amplifier modules and amplifier units made by other manufacturers that we really, really enjoy the sound of. We think we finally got to a place where it makes sense to have an entire amplification unit along with DSP, along with the preamp stage, everything else we need to be able to do it in a speaker design. Of course, when we think about this, I think one of the categories that would be a first foray for us into this would be a complete all-in-one unit, right? Something that does everything, has the speakers built into it. But as we progress through the different models that we're in development for, I do believe at some point you may see a powered speaker line from Sonus Faber. It's not outside of the realm of possibility, but it's not something that we're immediately working on. We've got plenty of projects in the passive world that we're tackling over the next year or two.
Something you've already done is subwoofers. Could you talk about which speakers they work with best? Yours, of course, are good. Anybody else's?
Yeah, we like to think our speakers are pretty good. So yes, our speakers are made to, our subwoofers rather, are made to play well with others. So this is the Gravis collection. It currently consists of 5 subwoofers. The first 2 were essentially designed to perfectly sonically and aesthetically match our Sonetto collection. All right, so this is our collection that ranges from just under a few $1,000s all the way up to about $8,000. And the thing about our subwoofers is they were designed from the ground up to augment a fine stereo system, right? And when we look at the use case of stereo versus theater, many times a theater sub is really judged based on its overall output and its concussion, right? The dynamics that the speaker is capable of. And while all of these subwoofers have excellent concussion, excellent dynamics, what is often lost in a subwoofer that is made for that purpose is the sense of textural detail, the sense of musicality that brings very large instruments to life. The low key on a grand piano, the low E string on a stand-up bass, the roll of a 40-inch timpani drum. All of these things have many, many, many more layers of information than just that initial thud and that decay that you hear from the instrument. So hearing the slight vibrato of the ring of the overtones of a stand-up bass, for instance, is not something that most theater subs are going to be incredibly good at capturing. And we find that low-level information, especially the low-frequency, low-level information, is one of the most important foundations for creating a good three-dimensional stereo soundstage. Right? So we believe in using subs with all of our stereo systems. We have designed these subs from the ground up to augment a fine stereo system. And I actually see subs less as an augmentation of your main listening speakers and more as something that addresses the critical nodes of the listening room, right? Because a listening space is always going to rob your frequencies in a very nonlinear fashion. Right, you're going to lose a lot more low frequency information at very particular frequencies, depending on the dimensions and the overall conditions of the room, than the allotment of most of what's going to be coming from the speaker. So with subwoofers, we can actually augment that low frequency information where it's needed. We can replenish that energy back into the room, and we can recreate the foundation that was originally recorded in the recording space, right, and recreate that environment. But again, they do great with theater as well. So moving up through the line, we've got the Gravis 1 and Gravis 2. Again, those are matched with the Sonetto. They've got the beautiful padded leather top. They've got the same real wood veneer and aesthetically and sonically matched to those speakers. As we move up, we've got the Gravis 3, which actually matches our Olympica Nova series. So this is a newer subwoofer from us and definitely moves into a different class. With this one, we decided to use Class D amplification with, it's Class AB amplification with a pure DSP engine. All right, so we're doing digital signal processing. So all your signals going in are brought into the digital domain. That's where we do our phase adjustment. That's where we do our frequency alignment. That's where we do our output calibration. And being able to use the digital signal processing on this, we were actually able to implement an 8-band parametric equalizer, rather, in the app. There's an application that controls this. There's also an auto EQ function, which allows you to use the microphone on your smartphone to essentially make a near field measurement of the subwoofer to gain the overall capabilities of the system, and then do a further field measurement from the listening position, right? It runs through all of the frequency test tones. It identifies all of the peaks in the frequency in the room, and it adjusts it to be as flat a frequency response as possible. So really, really cool tricks. I mean, what used to take me, way back in the day, it used to take me about an hour with, an LFO disc and a piece of graph paper and my laptop, I can now do in literally 45 seconds, and it does better than I ever could. So being able to equalize the subwoofer is hugely important. And then as you move up to our larger subwoofers, the Gravis 5 and the Gravis 6 here, they actually contain the same DSP engine, so they have all those same capabilities. We could get up into a larger driver, I should say on the Gravis 3, we're dealing with a 10-inch sealed enclosure. As we move up to the Gravis 5, we've got a 12-inch sealed enclosure. And then the Gravis 6 is actually a really interesting project. This is a dual active driver design where one of the drivers is actually bottom mounted up firing. Right, and this has different sound modes we can implement into it, where the drivers will essentially work against each other to create compression to give you a more concussive signal, or they can work along with each other to give you more bass extension and greater sense of detail and textural clarity. So really, really cool project that we were able to do with those dual woofers in there. I should say every single piece of the design, from the amplifier to the enclosure to the driver itself, is 100% Sonus Faber. And in the larger models, we're actually using a syntactic foam that is carbon fiber covered to give us the additional rigidity need for that extra long throw driver. But those are our subwoofers. Again, they play well with absolutely any speaker, and in fact do better than a lot of the speaker manufacturer subs themselves, because they were designed from the ground up to do just that. Right, so to give you perfect blending between what your speakers are capable of and where the subwoofer picks up, to be able to integrate into the room and perfectly address the inconsistency in bass that you get in most listening environments. And of course, they also have, besides the high-level connector that we recommend using that goes directly from your amplifier, they also have line level connections that you can run from your preamplifier, your integrated amplifier, of course, designed for a dedicated LFE channel as well. So they can be used both as an augmentation to your main stereo speakers, even if your multi-system, if your multifunction system is in stereo direct mode, we'll still be able to augment the speakers with the subwoofer. And when you flash it over to theater mode, it will actually take that LFE signal in tandem with the low frequency signal from the amplifier and do both perfectly. Right, so your theater system, when you're doing your calibration, will essentially see your left and right speakers as having amazingly full range, and it will calibrate accordingly. And it will also see that dedicated LFE channel as well. Of course, in modern day home theaters, I recommend at least 2 subwoofers, if not 4, to do the full duty of all the new surround sound formats. But those are our subwoofers, and again, they play well with absolutely any speaker out there.
We just passed our 3 o'clock mark for a break, but I have a couple of more questions. Let's go ahead and finish them off so we don't miss them. Could you talk a little bit about whether you're making a single driver full range speaker one of these days?
So this is it's almost the holy grail of audio, right? Being able to do a single driver design that has the rigidity, the low mass, and the excursion necessary to be able to render every frequency in the listening domain. We have yet to find a company that has done it perfectly, although there's been some really, really solid attempts out there that I was quite impressed with. And there's a sense of pinpoint accuracy in the sound staging that when it's done just right, albeit at low volume, because usually these things can't extrude as far as they should be able to represent the low frequencies, while they're having the tiny vibrations that they need to represent high frequencies at the same time without distortion. But it's really an interesting idea. And while we go to great lengths to make sure that the arrangement in the time domain, so the slight difference in depth, and obviously the distance to each other that we use in what we call the voice of Sonus Faber, which is our array of our damped apex dome tweeter and our natural foam or our natural fiber mid-range driver. I'm trying to see if I can find a picture of it. There is a certain sense of the, the anomalies that you get when you've got two drivers working next to each other. It is impossible to completely tailor out some of the comb filtering that you're going to get, some of the waveform interaction that you're going to get with those two drivers as they propagate the same frequency bands. This is why we take so much time in our crossovers to make sure that each of those drivers is only doing the frequencies that it's best at. And why we spend so much time making sure that our driver designs essentially sound like each other, essentially do a good job of integrating with each other such that as a transient passes from mainly outputting of one driver to mainly outputting from another driver, that you never hear the transition. Right? Incredibly, incredibly important to us. But all that said, if we were able to make a single driver that was capable of 40,000 hertz down to 40 hertz, that would be very, very interesting to us. But we just have not found the materials, the capability, or the motor to do them better than what we currently offer.
And one last question before we take a 5-minute break. Just could you tell us a little bit about the sales breakdown between North America, Europe, and Asia?
Yeah, so we do most of our sales in North America. In fact, throughout Sonus Faber's history, after they were first introduced to the United States, we've been responsible for about 50% of the global market. And this is true about most hi-fi manufacturers that are international. That said, when we look at our model layout, right, and we look at where is most of our growth happening according to family, according to model, I am amazed and honored to say that every single model we make has seen an increase in the trajectory in sales, not just here in the States where we're seeing amazing growth, even compared to the rest of the world, but in the rest of the world as well. So we're seeing amazing trajectory. I would say if I had to pick one family that, just by unit velocity, is our most popular, it would probably be this right here, the Olympica Nova collection. Right, and here in this particular rendering, we're showing the Palladio in-wall. This is our 664 LCR speaker being used as a center channel with a floor standing. This is the Olympica Nova 2 flanking the center channel. So you can see our in-walls and in-ceilings have this kind of beautiful wooden inlay. To that wooden inlay comes with a set of the elastic strings. It kind of finishes the look of a fine wood instrument. And I would say the Palladio is probably seeing our greatest trajectory right now. But we're still seeing the most sales velocity from the Olympica Nova. And we're doing lots and lots of systems out there where we're mixing and matching both these days.
And this is the last one I promised for this segment. People have been talking on the side about your earphones and your mic. Are they connected? Are they the same? Talk a little bit about why you've got good sound there. The comment is, what are you using and where did you pick them?
Thank you. Well, this is just a standard Shure studio mic. I don't even know what the model number is. And we're just going into an audio control USB interface. And that is also feeding my Prima headphones. This is a wired headphone that's just going into the same USB interface. So interesting story about the Prima. All right. So this is actually a handmade Italian. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Headphone. So this was a project that we tackled. Oh boy, that was 6 years ago now, I believe. That was so I was first coming aboard the company. But it was interesting for us. So we basically had our same acoustic engineers, our same designers working on this. They were literally hand built in Italy. I mean, right down to the neodymium magnets being placed by hand and glued into place. But it allowed us to really introduce Sonus Faber to a whole new category. When we talk about headphones, while there are, especially these days, many great hi-fi companies that make an excellent headphone as well, it really is a completely different category of product. You don't see a whole lot of crossover between the headphone world and the world of hi-fi. So while we did make what I consider to be a very fine headphone, it was something that we discontinued because we really needed to divert our manpower and really think and concentrate on our passive loudspeaker systems. But I think at this point, we've grown the company enough enough that we may revisit the category. And you may, over the next couple of years, see another, this time probably a more avant-garde, a little bit more audiophile quality headphone come from Sonus Faber.
Thank you. It's now 3:09, so at 3:15, let's start up again. Everybody take a break. You can turn your audio off and wander around and come right back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
William, you want to switch back the control for me?
Hey, William. This is Wayne.
I got it.
How you doing, Wayne?
Hey, not too bad. But will the headphones have strings on them?
Oh, that would be amazing. Maybe the strings as the protector to the drivers on the inside. That's funny. People ask me about the string grills all the time. It's like, well, what is the point of the strings? Like, obviously, aesthetically, they look very nice, right? They do present some sort of, an intellectual boundary, at least, from curious fingers getting a hold of your drivers. But really, we're made to complete the look of a fine string instrument and be acoustically transparent, right? So we want to make it as quiet as possible.
Normally, at this point, we just open it up. Everybody can unmute and go ahead and put their video on, and we'll go from there. Tom, how about sending a note to Garrett on that topic for me? Appreciate it. So I'm going to take myself off, if I can find that one. Back to gallery view, and then I will let whoever is speaking will actually get the screen from now on.
I'll kick off with a question for William. Is Sonus Faber going to be showing at any of the audio shows this fall?
Great question. I would have completely forgotten to talk about it. So yes, we will actually have presence at both Rocky Mountain Audio Fest coming up here and Axpona. So we'll be working with our dealer partners in both cases, obviously Listen Up in Denver and our friend Make It Quintessence in Chicago. So really looking forward to both of those shows. It'll be amazing. There's so many industry partners and friends and dealers that I just haven't seen in so long with this COVID madness. I'm really looking forward to it.
So you're not going to the Pebble Beach, William?
Oh yeah. So we also have a couple of activations that we're doing with our automotive partners. So as some of you should know, Macintosh has actually teamed up with Jeep Wagoneer. We're doing a couple of their newer models. And we've got Sonus Faber speaker. This is actually the first automotive system we've done since the Pagani Huayra, which was almost a decade ago now. We're actually in the new Maserati MC20 supercar. So I've had the great opportunity to be able to travel around with those guys as they've done some of their road shows. And the next one that we have for the Macintosh Jeep activation is in Pebble Beach next week.
Cool.
Should be fun.
Yeah, we loaned the Macintosh roughly a $100,000 two-channel system for the Pebble Beach event.
And this is why we love having great and capable partners.
Our showrooms are a little bit of a mess right this minute.
Yeah, we appreciate that. We realize all of the suffering and sacrifice you guys have to make to be able to support us at an activation like this. But I think it'll be well worth it.
I'll come in with another question here on the different finishes. You've been fairly standard lately. Do you have, or was there a lighter gray finish that was introduced with the Nova?
So, boy, my hands are tired. There's a lot I can't talk about. What can I say? So one of the things I'll tell you is every product that Sonus Faber makes from the Olympica Nova on up, we do actually have a custom finish program. So any paint color that you wanted, if you wanted a gloss paint finish, there's a standard upcharge for that. We can do pretty much anything you can think of. And then for our wood finishes, we do have certain model families that have a certain wood finish that's not included in some other model families. And we do have the capabilities of doing finishes that we don't actually offer. So we do have a custom finish program for that as well. So you contact your local dealer, let them know what you're thinking about. Of course, there's a standard upcharge for that and a delay, a production delay. But we can do lots of different custom finishes for the existing models that we have. That said, the possibilities exist for us to be coming out with some new standard colors. And I can tell you personally, perhaps on a completely unrelated issue, the finish that you're talking about is called Graphite. It was this beautiful wood grain gray finish. And it has always been my favorite finish at Sonus Faber. And I'm a little perturbed that we don't currently offer that as a standard finish. And that's as much as I'm going to say.
You can get the gold leaf lilium.
That's right. We do a custom lilium in the gold leaf.
Actually, I really like the white leather and wood look.
Yeah, the white walnut is really gorgeous. We actually had a customer that did a matching subwoofer as a custom finish to the white. It was really, really beautiful.
That's interesting. I haven't seen it live. I just seen pictures. It looks sexy though.
Wayne, if you had to pick one of their speakers today, which one would you pick and why?
My favorite speaker overall currently is the Amati Tradition. You know, like even over the upper models above it, you know, just for a combination of price point and function, sexiness and sound quality, great bottom end. I mean, it's just overall a very good speaker.
Yeah, you know, the Amati is an interesting product because it was literally the very first floor standing speaker that Sonus Faber ever made, right? So we're currently on the 4th generation of that speaker, and we've got to make sure that we do it justice. You know, it's kind of the signature namesake of the Sonus Faber brand. So every time we approach the Amati, we've got to think, okay, first of all, how do we improve it? Which is sometimes more difficult than others. Right. And then it's what technology do we have we developed over the time that we think we can make it significantly better? Obviously, there's always an assessment of what else is out there in the field in that price category. But we designed the Amati to destroy speakers at almost twice its price. Right. That has always been the kind of set goal for what the Amati does. Anytime I've got a shootout where I've got to do with another manufacturer, or we're talking about at a dealer or at a show, it's the Amati that I put in. As far as bang for your buck in the Sonus Faber line, it does not get much better. And there's really nothing that when properly placed and properly powered, there's nothing the Amati can't do. You know, it can create scope and size and width way, way bigger than you'd ever imagine a speaker that size being capable of. It has shockingly good bass, concussive bass. Really, really, when properly placed, that bass has so much information and yet so much weight at the same time, which is a really difficult balance to arrive at. And it happens to be the perfect size for most listening rooms. You know, the Amati, there's really not a room I've found where I can't get it to work.
Hey, William, tell them about the special function of the feet, you know, over the Serafino.
Yeah, I think I have a picture of that. But yeah, you know, there's an interesting kind of argument among the different philosophy or the different engineering houses across hi-fi. And it's really just, you know, two different ways to approach the same problem, right? So the problem is the driver volume and the driver mass that you have in a given loudspeaker system is going to vibrate the cabinet, and it's going to have forces in multiple different axes, right? You're going to get an up and down force that's on the floor constantly, and you're going to get a forward and backward pushing force as the equal and opposite force relative to the movement of the drivers, right? There's no way to completely, get all of the vibration out of a given system. No matter how much mass you add, no matter what materials you're using, no matter how much vibrational isolation you use internally, there's always going to be some amount of spurious vibration. So the idea with most speaker designs, and this is a perfectly good idea, and this is actually what we do on the entire first half of our line of products, is to ground that energy to the floor, right? And for this, we use spikes. The idea behind a spike is it takes this weight, which if I just place that weight in the same relative area, having the same relative contact area of the width and the depth of the cabinet, and I place that right on the floor, that weight would be distributed such that you would never have a good anchoring of that vibrational information. It would not be properly grounded into the floor itself. So by reducing that surface area more and more and more, and ideally in a spike, you reduce it to as close to zero as you possibly can, you essentially multiply the amount of weight that's on that surface. All right, so the idea is you're fooling that spike into believing that the speaker is much heavier than it is. All right, so you get much better grounding between the speaker and the floor, and then you're allowed to dissipate that energy into the floor. It's an ideal solution if you have floors that are grounded. All right, so if you've got concrete, if you've got cement, if you've got stone, and it actually connects directly to the base layer, and all of that information goes out into the ground and out into Mother Earth, that's an ideal solution. The problem with a spike is Newton's laws. All right, so every action is going to have an equal and opposite reaction. So as the spike pushes down onto the floor is going to push right back up onto that spike. And ideally, a spike is going to filter some of that energy so that you don't get as much energy going up into the speaker and being almost horn loaded by the spike as you did going down into the floor. All right, so it's two different philosophies. Do we isolate the speaker, or do we use a spike to try to ground the speaker? All right, again, two different wrong answers, and we've got to choose the best wrong answer in between. Right? The right answer is the wrong one in between the two wrong ones. So we, in our homage series and every single product above, implement some sort of an isolation. The reason Wayne's bringing up the Amati is because in the Amati, it's implemented in what I think is one of the most genius ways. So the Amati uses a spike, and that spike obviously makes contact with the floor. You can use our beautiful floor protector discs to put the spikes on top of. But with the Amati, the bushing that the spike, the negative thread that the female thread that the spike screws into itself is completely surrounded by a dampening material, right? So while most dampening solutions will have some sort of dampening on or isolation or grounding on the vertical domain, this is one of the few solutions I know of that actually isolates the speakers across every single axis. So it grounds the vertical information or the vertical vibration just as much as it does the horizontal information coming as a reaction from the drivers, especially the bottom woofer, relative to the place that the feet are. All right, so in that case, we're using the best of both worlds. We're using a spike solution so that you get that great interface between the floor and the speaker. And in that spike solution itself, we've actually built an isolation system that is calibrated to the exact weight that is applied to each of those four spikes, just slightly different in the front than the back, obviously. So it's one of the coolest solutions I've seen that implements, the best of both of those philosophies on how to deal with spurious vibration.
Can I ask a question? Do the spikes actually have a benefit? Is that benefit dismissed or muted if they're going into a carpet over a hardwood floor over a crawl space?
Yes. So in that case, it actually depends, in my opinion, it depends mostly on the strength of the hardwood floor. Right? Because if it's got the tensile strength of a piece of cardboard, you're going to have problems no matter what solution you use. Right? So I would say isolation is always going to be a benefit in that case because the floor is basically going to work like a sounding board. And while that may be beneficial at certain frequencies, it's certainly going to be. Yeah. While it's beneficial at certain frequencies, it's definitely not going to be beneficial at other frequencies. So yeah, the best solution in any of these questions that we get in hi-fi is try it both ways and see what sounds better. All right. Complete isolation solution should at some point actually use a spike anyway. So even if you're doing a spike that goes onto a plate and then that plate is isolated, right, you're still getting that good connection between the single point of contact of the spike and the speaker itself. That's going to be far superior than just saying putting the body, the actual cabinet of the speaker directly on the carpet, right? So there's definitely going to be some benefit there no matter what, even if you're not using any sort of isolation solution in between. But that said, you know, if you have a really, really active floor, if it has a lot of resonance to it, you're going to have problems no matter what. You may want to apply additional isolation.
Sure.
And what might be that additional isolation?
Ooh, being brand agnostic and not making a product in that category, I'm not even going to recommend what you might use. My recommendation would be to go see your local dealer and see what they're using in their showroom.
No, I meant like, are you talking about foot? Or are you talking about base? Like a
No, so
platform?
you know, you've got lots of different solutions. There's many different great companies that make actual spikes, right? And we use a standard threaded spike, so you can remove the spike that's in a speaker now and actually use a spike that uses some sort of an isolation technology internal to the spike, right? If we're talking about the Homage series or any of the products that we have developed above that, I would say continue to use the spike that came in the box. I think we've got the best possible solution for each of those models. But where we needed to save costs and not necessarily implement that, something like the Olympica Nova, the Sonetto, any of the other models there, and obviously most other speaker manufacturers that don't implement some sort of a isolation device in their stands or spikes. There's a couple of different ways to do it. One is to add additional mass as a grounding plate, right? So have a thick piece of marble or granite or something like that and place the entire speaker on top of that. That, in my experience, almost always has a positive effect on the sound across the frequency scale, right? So that's a good solution. But you still have to consider that that piece of marble or that piece of granite or what have you is interfacing with the floor. So it might behoove you, depending on the floor material, to actually place some sort of a TPE-based material or a zorbothane-based material, something that's actually soft, in between that and the floor. You might actually find that grounding it directly to the floor sounds better. You might find that placing spikes underneath the granite and then spikes on the speakers onto the granite is the best solution, right? There's all sorts of different ways to do it.
I was going to ask you about that. That's actually what I was kind of thinking, is that if you had like some heavy slab on a spike going through the carpet to the hardwood, and then your standard, let's say, spikes with coasters up on top of it, would probably be about as good as you could get.
Yeah, again, as long as whatever leftover vibration that you're transferring after the entire system filters out the energy that it can isn't vibrating the floor, right? So if the floor is really, really sensitive to vibration, then we want to have some sort of an isolation piece in place no matter what. And keep in mind, when we're talking about a spike, we're not talking about isolation, we're talking about grounding. Isolation is always going to include some sort of a filter, transformer, that takes that vibration and turns it into heat energy, right? So zorbothane is a perfect example, but there's actually lots of solid state solutions that actually do the same thing. There's a lot of really interesting material science being applied to vibration control in hi-fi, and I love it.
Okay. If I can chime in here on that topic, if you've got access to your crawl space, or if you have a full basement underneath it, you can go and get a 4x4 beam at Home Depot or wherever, and put that directly under where your speaker will be, and that will transfer any kind of vertical motion right to earth. And then, as William said there too, if you can put a piece of vibration absorbing material between the post and the floor itself, well, you've got the best of both worlds there. And then you can deal with whatever kind of spike your given manufacturer recommends there.
Sure.
Yeah, find solutions. I've actually looked at, when trying to figure out, almost like tuning a violin, when trying to figure out the ideal place to put one of those types of bracings, using a car jack, right? So you put the 2x4 up there, your 4x4 up there, and then, fill in the extra space with a car jack and just bring it up into space, listen to it, see how the speakers respond, especially in the low frequency, and then try it at a different place. Maybe it's going to sound best slightly in front of the speaker, maybe slightly behind the speaker, maybe at one of the spike points, right? You can actually tune it to sound. So yeah, when you do have the amazing advantage to be able to get underneath the floor and try different experiments like that, yeah, go for it. Absolutely. But keep in mind, there's still, what we're trying to address, right, is there's two different types of vibration that are coming from the speaker, two main types of vibration worth addressing, right? The vertical vibration is actually shaking the floor. There's going to be the resonant response that the floor has to that, just like beating a drum head. And then there's going to be the forward and backward vibration that's going to be, opposing the movement of the drivers, right? The ideal setting for a bass woofer is going to be completely solid. It's going to have as much mass behind it as humanly possible. So that's why spikes will tend to have a better effect at sharpening your bass, right? But what we're trying to avoid is the resonant frequencies from interfering with that bass before it can get a chance to the listener, or even worse, creating sound of itself that's its own, that's louder than the bass that we're trying to get to, or that's trying to get to us. So we need to make sure that we're addressing both of those in their own right? It's not a single solution that's going to address both of them individually. So again, if we've got the ideal situation where we can ground as much of that energy to the earth itself, that's usually going to be advantageous. But if we've got any floor interaction, causing waveforms whatsoever, it's usually going to be better to implement some sort of an isolation solution.
So basically just pour a 4-inch slab of concrete.
Yeah. Why stop at 4, Wayne? Why stop at 4?
It's not pretty,
Albert,
but
can
it
you
works.
jump in here? Albert, can you jump in here with your comment? I guess the answer is no. Okay, everybody, I think most people saw that already come across. Talking about customer service at the source, one of our members asked, oh, okay, Albert. Albert says his mic's not connected, so I'll read that to you here in a minute. One of our members said, could I please see that white speaker you were talking about? And lo and behold, the source provided it. There it is.
Beautiful.
Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so
William?
what you're looking at is hand-finished walnut. I forget if there's 12 or 16 coats of lacquer on top of that. And this beautiful leather baffle, right? Of course, finished in this ivory white. And then there's a synthetic leather that actually finishes the entire back of the speaker. It's got these beautiful ribs in it. So this is a on the menu custom finish that we do. This is something that we can make anytime. And you've got your choice between the beautiful titanium finished hardware that's shown there. We can also do a black hardware with this if that's your preference. But just one of the many different custom finishes that we do to make sure that the beautiful piece of furniture you're bringing home matches the rest of the furniture. And then for this, for one of the customers that had a pair that was built for him, we went ahead and did a custom subwoofer. All right, so he got the Gravis 6. And the Gravis 6 is finished in leather as well. The entire cabinet is wrapped in leather, and then it has this beautiful wooden inlay that goes over top of it. So we did the same wooden inlay, the walnut there, and we did the same white leather for the subwoofer as well. So it's just a beautiful combination.
Plus, I like all of these silver hardware too that goes with it.
Yeah, that's my preference. That's what I went with. I'm a big fan. Any other questions out there?
This is the time that you get to get in your last and final shot at getting the answers you need.
How about putting a heavy weight on top of the speaker?
Usually not recommended. So while it does have a benefit in certain cases, because obviously you're adding mass, that mass is not going to react the same way that the rest of the speaker does. And I can tell you in our speakers, we are very, very aware of all of the compensatory motion that our cabinet has as a response to the frequencies that it's emanating. And actually the very top of the speaker, just by nature of being the furthest from the floor, is the one that can actually be most affected by movement that's happening across that axis of the driver, right, or across that axis of the cabinet itself. So while adding weight there could theoretically be beneficial, you could also wind up creating counter resonation, right? So if you think of the way, you know, a dampener works in a skyscraper, right? There's a massive weight at the top, and then there's a larger massive weight at the bottom. And anytime the top goes one way, it's you know, across this long pole, it makes the other weight go the opposite way, and it stabilizes the building. But if you had that effect in the opposite, that is to say that those weights weren't perfectly calibrated to each other, it would actually make the building shake more, right? So any influence by the wind or an earthquake would actually be multiplied by that weight being at the top, being 180 degrees out of phase with the primary vibration, right? So you may wind up doing more harm than good. All right. Across the board, it will add structural rigidity. It should quiet down the cabinet. It should reduce some of the spurious vibration, but it could cause a negative effect that could actually, you know, kind of negate all of those advantages.
Kind of like the metal pole and weight inside the speaker holding the woofer in place on the that's on the Lilium, I believe.
Yes, it doesn't actually hold the speaker in place. What we're talking about is the let's see if I can find a picture of this. I thought I have it up. Yeah, so what we're talking about is the tuned mass damper. Yeah, I do actually have a picture. Let me have a screen share control back if you don't mind. Show you a quick picture of this.
Yeah, give me a second. I've got to find you. There
I'm
you
not hard to
are.
find.
Coming up.
So this is the tuned mass damper. So what we're looking at is the AIDA. And this is one of a couple of different speakers that we implement this in. But the idea here is we have this rigid metal rod that's connected on both ends to different points. Again, these are computer generated points that were designed to harness the spurious vibration internal to the cabinet, right? We then take another weight, and both of these weights are tuned, right? So there's two weights on each side that are tuned, and then the amount of tension that's applied to the weight and the individual TPE material that's in between the weights, and then separating the weight from the cabinet itself, right? So what this does, much like the skyscraper example I was just giving, or actually more accurately, the same type of system they use to isolate the driver in the cockpit of a Formula One racer from the engine noise, right? Or the engine vibration. They use the same exact type of system. So by using perfectly calibrated weights to the frequency range that you're attacking, and by applying pressure on both sides of those in a precise manner, we can basically tune out any of the resonant frequencies that would be internal to the cabinet, both the wooden box itself and the air mass within the box. So we eliminating the distortion before it has a chance to affect the system. All right, so I don't know of any other speaker manufacturer that does this. And it's a very, very effective way to make a cabinet that is as flat as it needs to be to properly recreate sound, but not completely 100% totally dead.
Right.
William, I've always loved your Electro Amateur two-way as a small monitor. It's one of the finest in the industry, I think. Is that the top of the line two-way that a mini, small speaker that you make now?
No, technically speaking, the Guarneri tradition is at a higher price point, and I would say more technically proficient of a speaker. So if you're listening to the differences in the quality of amplifiers, for instance, and doing a comparison, I find that the Guarneri is going to be much more resolving and show you more of those differences than something like the Electa Amateur. I always tell people the Electa Amateur, while it is amazingly open and resilient and has clarity and liquidity to it, it's tuned a little bit more for fun. So I would say it's a little laid back sounding. It's a little bit more colored, for lack of a better sound, or lack of a better term. And it harkens a little bit more toward the sound quality of Sonus Faber of days past, right? So the entire Heritage series was made both aesthetically and sonically for, you know, fans of the original Sonus Faber. Right. So while it has the technical proficiency of our greatest new design of damped apex dome tweeter, so much more top end resolution than any previous Sonus Faber two-way in days past, the Guarneri tradition is a more top to bottom, technically proficient speaker. Right. So it does sound staging and three-dimensionality a little bit better. It does integration a little bit better. The overall textural information you get from the entirety of its frequency range is a little bit better integrated. So I think it's a better all-arounder. And that's at the, what, $17,000 price point, whereas these are 10 with the stands. But as far as fun to listen to, I might lean toward the Electa Amateur, to be honest. It really is tuned for fun. And I've never met anybody that didn't enjoy the hell out of the sound.
I'm not seeing the Guarneri on the website. That's why I'm missing that.
It's part of the homage level.
Yep, so this is the Homage Tradition collection here. So this is the Amati on the left, the Serafino, which is a smaller floor standard that we invented just for this rendition of the family, just for this iteration. The Vox Center, which is as much center channel as anybody's ever going to need for anything, in my opinion. And of course, on the right there is the Guarneri Tradition. So the Guarneri is just as important as speaker as the Amati, in that it literally was the first reference series speaker from Sonus Faber. It was the one that was actually designed for the Museo di Violina, probably the world's most famous violin museum in Cremona. And the owners, the story goes, approached Franco Serblin because they found that of all the speakers they had listened to in Italy, Sonus Fabers were the best at being able to recreate the voicing and timbre of different violins. Right. And what they wanted was basically booths in each of the different displays for the famous ancient violins that they had, so that they would have, some of the world's greatest violinists really come in, do a very special recording of that particular violin, right, playing the same music, and then go on through each of the violins and make a recording so that anyone visiting that museum could actually listen to the differences in tonality and voicing of these different violins as they go down the displays. So Franco was absolutely set aside by it, but he refused the request. And he said, no, the current Sonus Faber speakers I make now are not good enough for what you're asking. I am going to make a speaker particularly for this purpose. And that is how he made the very first Guarneri. So yeah, the Guarneri, which is actually still
compare this
museum now.
Can you compare this to the Olympia?
To the Olympica, yes. So the Homage series features more structural rigidity in the cabinets. It features a better porting system. It features similar drivers as we're using in the Olympica Nova, but more highly refined, especially when it comes to little details like the surrounds. And one of the biggest differences here is where the Olympica Nova essentially has all of its drivers utilizing the same cabinet space internally, right? So they're all essentially sharing. And while they are braced differently and they are isolated from each other using batting material, there's not actually separate sub cabinets for each of the drivers. When you move up to the Homage Tradition, there's actually individual sub cabinets internal for each one of the drivers that you see in the system. So then each one of them is separately ported throughout the back spine. And each one of them has the optimal acoustic loading for the frequency range that they're responsible for. So in the Amati, for example, one of the things that we do that's unique is we're actually able to tune each of the two woofers differently. such that the top woofer has some shared information with the mid-range driver, but the bottom woofer here has absolutely none. So there's a filter in between them. Furthermore, we can optimize the loading and the porting system to that band of frequencies. So the loading that we have and the size of the chamber that we have for this upper bass woofer is actually completely different than the one that we have for the bottom bass woofer. So this allows us to custom tune the entire cabinet so that each and every driver has the optimal loading. And yeah, that's something that we do not do in the Olympica Nova, although the sound quality of the Olympica Nova is startling for the price point. We really designed those to be the giant killer.
We're coming up on 4 o'clock. Anybody else like to jump in? I have one additional question just came in. Should the leather on the speakers be maintained by treating it with a product, and what product is recommended?
Yeah, for the leather, you could use essentially anything that's designed for like a car upholstery or furniture. The processes that we use are fairly stable, so you don't have to worry about too much about different chemicals removing the dye or the paint. And the leather that we use is actually a remulsified pulp. So it's extremely consistent, far more consistent and durable than a pure natural hide leather. So you can basically treat it with anything that's going to be non-corrosive and not any sort of abrasive or anything like that. But I can tell you, I've had Sonus Faber speakers for over 10 years where the only thing I really needed to do was apply a bit of Crystal Lux, which is a very, very distilled detergent, right? So it's just a really, really simple low detergent and distilled water solution, and just basically dust them with that whenever they've got enough dust for them to notice it. And then you can use the same stuff for the wood, and then go on to the metal pieces as well. So really, the finishes are stable enough that they don't require any sort of upkeep or maintenance.
Great. Okay, last chance. Come on down.
Okay.
Well, let me thank you, William, for your time, and thank the Source for sponsoring you guys and making sure that they represent you well, which they do. Thank you all for coming. If there's anything else that we can help you with, please let me know in chat or by email at jcmoore@aol.com. Next time will be September 12th. That's a Sunday. Dr. David Robinson, who is a known educator, photographer, and I like to say DSD expert. He introduced me to that area and is very interested in it. And as we heard a little bit about that last time, that'll be fun. If there's anything else that we can help you with, please check the website for membership information, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. All have a great one.
Thank you, William.
It's been a pleasure.